Welcome to Stitchery Stories, where textile artists share their life in fabric and thread, inspiration, techniques, disasters and delights. And I'm Susan Reeks, enthusiastic embroiderer and textile art dabbler who also loves podcasting. So take a break and enjoy our light-hearted chat, and please share with your friends so they can enjoy it too. Hello and welcome to our lovely guest, Dr. Jennie Batchelor. Hi, Jennie.
Hi.
Dr. Jennie Batchelor is Professor of 18th Century Studies at the School of English at the University of Kent. And she has been working on a research project based upon the Ladies' Magazine, which was published between 1770 and 1832. And that magazine contained embroidery patterns, which, in a nutshell, inspired Jennie to run an interesting project that she called the Great British StitchOff. And that was based around those embroidery patterns in the magazine. So that's why I've asked Jennie to join us here on Stitchery Stories today. It's all very interesting, and I did actually attend a really fascinating talk that she gave a couple of weeks ago, which is how we met. So welcome, Jennie. And if you want to please, before we start with a quick background of how your academic research into the Ladies' Magazine developed into the Great British Stitch-Off, and basically why everybody was so excited about some old embroidery patterns.
Yeah, I got very excited about old embroidery patterns.
Me too. I've got a hoard, but not as old as yours.
Well, I mean, partly I'm excited because I don't have a hoard. It's really hard to try and even gather a hoard together with all the resources I've been trying to mobilise to do that. I mean, that's really why I became interested in the patterns in the first place. I've been working on early women's magazines, the first women's magazines from the 18th century. That's when the genre starts, for a very long time now. And they're really fascinating publications because they're so diverse. You know, they have lots of printed material in kind of every genre, every kind of writing you can imagine, whether it's an essays or poetry or travel writing, or whether it's sort of etiquette, manual advice, or or fiction, Gothic novels, all that kind of stuff. It really has a wonderfully diverse set of contents, and it also has the Ladies' Magazine, like other magazines of the time, had engravings, and also it had a very keen interest in fashion. This is one of the ways that the Ladies' Magazine distinguished itself from rival publications like the Gentleman's Magazine, for instance.
Yeah.
And it satisfied its readers' interest in fashion and tried to sort of spread London or Paris fashions out into the provinces and all over the United Kingdom through different ways. So it had fashion reports where it sort of said, hemlines are up and necklines are down and this kind of thing. And it also had, rather irregularly at first, but eventually after about 1800, very regularly, these really beautiful, often hand-coloured fashion plates, right, which are really gorgeous items and very collectible. But it had, those were, I suppose, more like, I don't know, like the kind of photographs you might see in Vogue magazine now. They're the kind of things that you might want to wear, but most people can't afford to wear.
Yes, exactly.
On the high street. They're sort of aspirational. But it had a more practical sort of attitude to fashion in its provision of embroidery patterns, which it provided every single month for 50 years, the first 50 years of the magazine. And as I say, the reason I became so fascinated in these patterns is I couldn't find any. Every copy of the magazine that I'd looked at, it seemed, didn't have one. But I knew that they were there. I knew they had been there because the monthly table of contents lists that were produced at the beginning of every issue told us what was in there, and it would say, pattern for an apron, or pattern for a reticule, or pattern for a gentleman's.
Right. So it did actually list them, even though you couldn't necessarily find them anywhere. Did it? Well, I've got a question, but we'll come back to that. Go on.
Yeah, so there were I had this sort of embarrassment of riches. I knew there was about 650 of these patterns that must have been produced, and I couldn't really find any. And then anyway, to cut a very long story short, one day after many years of working on the magazine, while I was running the research project that you mentioned earlier, I was also writing a blog about my interest in the magazine. And somebody who read the blog contacted me because she owned a copy of the magazine and she was looking for a new home for it, and asked me if I'd buy it.
Right.
It was from 1796, and I drove to go and see her, and I happily bought the magazine from her, and I would have bought it regardless because I'm amassing a collection and I'm fascinated by it. But I was particularly excited, and there was considerable squealing going on when I looked at the book and realised that it had lots of folded up pages in it, and that meant one of two things. Either they were all song sheets, because the magazine also produced music, music sheets which were folded up in it, or these were patterns. And sure enough, I opened it up, and in the 6 months worth of the magazine that she had and that I was going to buy from her, there were 5 embroidery patterns, none of which I'd ever seen in about 15 years of working on the magazine.
Wow, fantastic. So 15 years you'd been looking at this magazine and you'd never come across an actual pattern?
I'd come across a couple in libraries, but right, I mean, like a couple out of 650. I mean,
God, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that was. Oh, I should imagine you'd have been so utterly excited then after all that time to like get your hands on some. Brilliant.
I was really, really excited, and I didn't really know what to do with them other than to just look and admire them. But then a sort of happy accident, if you will. I actually was in a very minor car accident, and I was laid up for a few days because I had a sore back and couldn't really sit at my desk for very long at a time. And I'd really had twitchy fingers and thought, I'm really bored. I can't really do very much at the moment. So I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll share some images of this book that I've just bought with people who were interested in the ladies magazine and our social media accounts that we had for the project I was running. And I just put some pictures up on Twitter and just said, oh, look at these. And I was completely bowled over by how excited other people were.
Wow.
Patterns too.
Yeah, that's a fascinating response. So was it tens? Was it hundreds of people? What sort of people were getting in touch with you about it?
Well, it was all sorts of people from all over the world, actually.
Wow.
And it started, in small numbers with people saying, oh, what is this? What's this from? Some of the people who responded initially were people who were already following the project. But what was really exciting for me was that very quickly, I started having all sorts of people, sending me emails or sending me tweets and direct messages and so forth, asking me about it, who knew nothing about the ladies magazine, nothing about the project, but they were clearly part of the, as we know, really, enormous needlework community around the world. And we're just really, the word was getting out and people were interested. And then the questions started to evolve from what is this, where's it from, into how could I make this? And then I thought, oh yeah, that would be a good idea.
Yes. People were intrigued then as to they wanted to give it a go as well. So exactly. I have to say, I definitely saw the project and the patterns, and I think I even went to your blog because I would have had it shared, and I have a feeling it was Alison Larkin who'd shared it. And I was like thinking, oh yes, I'm going to have a go with that, and I was going to do a bit of a modern twist on it. Anyway, kind of as ever, life got in the way, and I didn't actually even start anything, but I am now inspired to.
Oh, there's still time.
There's still time to go and to do it as well, because I keep thinking to myself, I fancy doing back to more traditional embroidery, because I've done all sorts of random things recently. So, that's fantastic, and the power of social media. Who'd have thought it really? That's something that started off as an academic research paper, finished up with a load of people desperate to actually have a go and stitch the patterns. That's wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I would really love to say that the whole thing was meticulously planned, and I'd come up with this brilliant idea and saw it through. But really, the whole thing just grew as the best projects, I think.
Exactly, it was like a happy set of organic and happy set of coincidences. Brilliant. Yeah. So before you'd actually got involved with the embroidery aspect of the ladies magazine, had you ever been interested in embroidery and textile art at all? Have you ever dabbled?
I have. I mean, not so much textile art, which I like, which I appreciate and I like looking at, but I haven't really been involved in that before. But embroidery and all manner of needlework, yes, from quite an early age actually. My for two reasons really. One is that my own mum has a sort of almost pathological hatred. Having had a rather traumatic experience at school once with some cross stitch that accidentally
school cross stitch,
and meant that she would never even entertain the thought of sewing a button on our school shirts and things if they came off. But her mother, my grandmother, was very keen and very good at needlework. And I mean, she was born in the early 1920s. She was from that generation of women who needed to mend clothes regularly because they couldn't keep affording to buy them, and of course there was rationing. And also she enthusiastically made her own clothes, so when I was very young, she taught me how to do cross stitch, I think, first of all, and then she taught me how to make up patterns from Woman's Weekly, and I started making my own clothes when I was sort of about 11 or 12, I guess. And also, I mean, my paternal grandmother actually, I remember, bought me, I think it was for my 9th birthday, bought me this great big fat Reader's Digest book of needlework, which I've actually got, quite near to where I'm talking to you from right now, and which I kind of slavishly went through. I think I practiced French knots for about 4 weeks until I think I sort of got them just about okay. So yeah, a long-standing interest. And in fact, just recently, in the not too distant future, I've got 2 children, and before my daughter, who's nearly 10 now, was born, I made her quite a it's not particularly expert, but a serviceable quilt that she played with when she was young. And for my son, who was born 5 years ago, he was born very prematurely, and while he was in hospital, he was in hospital for an extended period of time, and it was, as you can imagine, very stressful. And I spent the evenings when I was quite tired and a bit sort of run down by the whole thing, actually making him a cot blanket, for when he came home, which I've never actually finished, because fortunately a little bit sooner than we thought. But nonetheless, it's still there. It's a work in progress, and it will get done. Right.
Normally, I do have a question in there about people for their unfinished objects, which is always quite amusing. So you've actually jumped the gun on that one. And it's nice to know. Right. The other question I was going to ask you earlier on was about the patterns. Oh yes. You knew the patterns were there. But was there set up any instructions with them? Any other indication of what to do with these things? Like we get now, you'll get a picture, won't you? And then some detailed instructions of what to do.
Yeah, gosh, and I love instructions. No, absolutely none at all. And that's, to me, completely fascinating and really, really revealing, because as you say, I mean, now we buy kits, we have the threads chosen for us. If we want to go down that route, we have step-by-step instructions. We can go on YouTube to check out
how to do
this stitch or the other. But no, there's absolutely nothing at all. There's no accompanying commentary even. The only kind of printed words that you get anywhere with the patterns is on the patterns themselves, which will just simply tell you what they're for. So it'll say something like, a new and elegant pattern for a winter shawl, for instance.
Right. Okay. So it's basically a title, and that's it then. So obviously the assumption was everybody was utterly skilled in the art of embroidery and needlework and didn't need any instructions.
Absolutely. And I mean, from what we know of the period, the late 18th, the early 19th century, I mean, that would have been true. I mean, most girls at the time were taught to sew in the home by their relatives. If they had any formal schooling, which not women did at that time, they were usually taught needlework at school.
Right, yes.
As well. And, in many cases, young girls were learning to sew before they could write. In fact, some actually learned to form letters in the first instance through stitching the shape of the letters before they ever picked up.
Right, because everyone used to do a lot of those samplers as well, didn't they? That was always a popular thing to do.
Yeah, samplers are very popular, and there's no patterns for samplers at all in the ladies' magazine. Although one thing they do have, which is exactly the kind of project we know that girls at the time often engaged in school when they were doing needlework, is maps. So there are some maps embroidery maps in the ladies' magazine for England and Wales, for Europe, and for the Americas as well.
Oh, right. So
learn geography and needlework
at the same time. So, in terms of our current thoughts on teaching and education, then that's quite a multimedia, multidisciplinary approach to learning something, isn't it? To get them doing. So let them learn about geography by actually embroidering a map of it. Marvellous.
Exactly. And I think, anyone who's got young relatives in school at the moment, I think about my son who's 5, and, there's so much emphasis on sort of learning with your hands and tactile learning.
Yes.
So, it's a very old concept.
Well, this is it. There is nothing new under the sun. There's even the magazines with all these things in. As you say, there's a couple of hundred years ago, they had all this extra information in there. There again, we didn't have television, did we? So it was, as you say, an absolutely invaluable resource for people. So
absolutely.
I'm absolutely fascinated by it. So going back to when you actually launched, you had that bit of an idea while you were not well, people sending and getting excited about the pictures and so on, the patterns. So when you, as you say, it grew organically. When you launched the StitchOff, what hopes did you have for it? What did you think would happen next?
I had absolutely no idea.
Splendid.
I suppose what I hoped was that people would just enjoy them first and foremost. And that maybe some people would actually do something with it, and there might be some pretty photos shared on social media. And that certainly did happen. What I didn't expect was the number of people. I mean, we had dozens and dozens of people all over the place who were working on this. I also found that patterns led to more patterns, which was a really exciting thing, which I totally had not anticipated. So I originally put the 5 patterns that I'd acquired on a website, and then somebody contacted me to say that they had a number of patterns in a copy of the magazine that they owned.
Right.
BBC Radio 3 presenter Penny Gore, who contacted me out of the blue one day. In fact, oddly, while I was actually listening to Radio 3 on my computer at the time, so I've got some patterns. Would you like to release them as well? Which we gladly did, and I subsequently acquired another couple as well. So by the end, we had 10 patterns. What I really did not anticipate that we would get the response that we did, with so many people enjoying them, reworking them, sometimes going back to historically faithful methods, sometimes doing really, in the spirit that you were talking about earlier, some sort of really wonderful modern reimaginings of them.
Yes.
And eventually, it all led to, again, totally unforeseen, led to us holding a display of many of the items that were produced at Chawton House Library, which is the big house, as it used to be called, that belonged to one of Jane Austen's brothers in the town of Chawton, that she spent a great deal of her life in. And they were enjoyed by, I think, about 7,000 visitors over the course of a few months. So it was just an extraordinary journey, really.
Brilliant. And how nice to tie in the Jane Austen story with these patterns, which would, if I get my history right, would have been about the same period.
Exactly.
Of the kind of the image that you have of ladies sitting about in their sitting rooms working with the needlework. They didn't have a great deal else to do either, especially the kind of ladies of leisure. That's the picture you have, isn't it? So how wonderful that the exhibition made it, they were exhibited there. That's brilliant.
Well, the magazine started about 6 years before Jane Austen was born. The patterns were being produced in it until 3 years after she died.
Right.
We know that Jane Austen did embroidery herself, and that she was very good at it, apparently. Her nephew famously wrote that she was an expert in satin stitch. She would have put a sewing machine to shame. She was so precise and neat and talented with the needle. So it was really lovely. And the important thing also, of course, is that we know that Jane Austen read the ladies' magazine. I can't say for sure that she ever worked up one of the patterns from the magazine, but I'd like to think she was. But no, it seemed like a really fitting place.
Yes. No. And as you say, we can't prove that, but do you know what? It's kind of highly likely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like a popular magazine of the time with the regular patterns, and and she was interested in embroidery, so highly likely. So that's exciting as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. What did you actually learn? Did you learn anything about the patterns from the StitchOff activity, where people were now trying to actually do something with them 200 years later?
Yeah, and again, this is another wonderful aspect of the project that I really don't think I could have foreseen when it started. Yeah, I learned a lot. I did make something myself, but mostly I think I learned from other people's experiences. I learned a few things, really. One of the things I learned is what we were talking about earlier, was just how much the magazine could expect of its readers, how much knowledge and how much expertise is one thing. So that was really interesting to me. I think the other thing that I really hadn't appreciated was also that part of that trust that they sort of extended to their readers was that they also were able to assume that they had enough sort of creativity, really, to be able to imagine what to do with these patterns. Because although patterns are very carefully drawn out, they never give you information on what stitches to use. They don't give you information on what colour schemes to use. So there's quite a lot of artistic license, if you like, that's being given over to the people making them. And we could see that in the exhibits, because no two looked anything like each other.
Yes, and as you say, you had, was it 5 patterns that were released as part of that project? So, a number of people all trying 5 patterns, and for things to come out all totally different, just kind of says it all, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, I think it just really brought home how skilled the readers of the magazine were assumed to be, how artistic perhaps they could have been with this. We tend to think about needlework, as you said, is so it's such a central part of female life, in this period, when it's so common that needlework is usually referred to at the time just simply as work, like it's women's work. It's what you do. It's
what women did. Yes,
leisure. So we sort of think about it as being, well, for some women it probably was really drudgery, but the experience of making up these patterns, I think, shows something quite different, which is it could be really creative, it could be really exciting. And one of the other things that we found out sort of completely accidentally was that some of the patterns have actually we know anecdotally they were made up because certain readers write about the patterns in letters and so forth. But we have identified at least one, or at least a friend of mine has identified at least one of the patterns that we released has been made up into, that's actually a pair of shoes, uppers, embroidered shoes.
Oh, fantastic.
There is actually an example of those shoes made up with the ladies' magazine pattern in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which was a really exciting find by my friend and colleague Alicia Kerfoot in the States.
Yeah, and now doesn't that tie the whole thing together as well? So here's an actual item which, with your research, you can now say, well, actually, did you know, maybe they did, maybe they didn't, the pattern has actually come from this pattern in the ladies' magazine.
And they've got if you look at the Victoria and Albert Museum website where there's a picture of the shoes on there, they've sort of dated it to between 1770 and 1779, and we can say quite categorically, well, it probably would have been made in 1775 or 6 because the pattern was released in the magazine in 1775.
Right. Oh, that's really great. So obviously there's a lot of knowledge is fed back into your academic work from that, but for me, I also like to feel that it's given, as you say, some emphasis and some acknowledgement of the creativity and artistic skills of ladies in that period, which presumably didn't get very much respect almost. It was, as you say, it was just something that women did. Men typically have been artists, aren't they? I don't want to be sexist here, but women don't ever seem to get much credit for this sort of thing back in the day.
No, as you say, it's considered so much of just a part, like the sort of the fabric of everyday life, that it almost becomes kind of mundane. And I think that does, if we think about it in that way, we do such a disservice, to women of the past and the extraordinary creativity that they had, and it could have, I think, for a lot of women as well. I mean, this is certainly true if you read descriptions of Jane Austen doing needlework. She's not sort of sat there on her own with a hoop. It's a really sociable experience. Needlework was a really sociable thing. It was done with other women, usually in domestic spaces, and over chats and over gossip. So whilst it is very domestic on the one hand, it is also a creative experience, and it is also something which is very sociable, and it could be incredibly pleasurable. And I think for me, that was another one of the lovely things about the project, which as we've said, sort of came out of grew but really because of social media. It sort of created this wonderful virtual community of people, all over all over the place, all over the world, who were coming together and talking about their work in progress on Twitter or on Facebook and other places, and sharing their experiences. And we had such a range of people involved. Some people had never picked up a needle before. Some people hadn't for years.
Wow, that's unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, some had, and a number of people were very skilled in other areas. So, for instance, we had Bethany Cladle, who did a wonderful hoop with a waistcoat pattern on it for us. She really absolutely stunning. I couldn't believe it when she wrote to me and said, I don't do embroidery. She does historical dress reproduction. I mean, it was just completely exquisite. She'd worked in a completely different discipline. Completely different medium, before, and sort of transfer those skills and see what she could do with the embroidery was really wonderful. We had lots of textile artists as well, who were kind of reimagining these 200-year-old patterns through their preferred medium, whether it was crochet or whether it was through other forms of various forms of textile art.
Yes, really I know you said they were part of an exhibition. Is there a visual record? Is there anywhere we can go and look and see some of the work that was created? Obviously, it's back with people, isn't it? It's their stuff kind of thing. It's hidden away back in their houses, but is there somewhere where we can look at it?
Absolutely. Lots of images of work in progress were shared on our sort of social media channels. So if you go into Google and just search Ladies Magazine Project, you'll find us on Twitter and Facebook and other places. Yeah. And we also had a blog as well, which again will come up if you just search those terms in Google. And the blog, we have several posts about the StitchOff with lots of photographs of the exhibits. And really exciting for me, we actually for a week gave over the blog to various people who had produced items, very different items.
Oh, lovely.
For the StitchOff. So they've actually describing their own experiences and what they learned and what they found difficult, challenging, or just purely pleasurable about the whole thing. So there's lots of accounts by people who are involved as well. But the other thing is we did do a short video for YouTube as well about the stitch, where we have photographed a lot of the materials. That I can't say that we've spent as much time on every single item as I would have liked. It's a very short 5-minute video, but it absolutely captures
the essence
of the exhibition, and will give you some sense of the extraordinary range and talent of the many people who were involved in it.
Oh, right. Well, I'm definitely going to go and look at that. And what I will do, Jenny, is include all of these links on the episode show notes, as we call it. So basically, on the website, each episode is like a blog post, basically, with the recording of our chat, plus then any links and a summary and anything else I can think to put on there. So there was all these people beavering away. Did you actually do a piece yourself? Did you dig out your old embroidery skills and have a go?
I did, and I decided that I would work on a pattern that at the time it seemed nobody was working on. There were certain patterns that were really popular and others which were not. And one of the not so popular ones was for a gentleman's cravat.
Right.
So, a kind of necktie thing.
Yeah.
And so I decided that I would just have a go, and I wasn't going to make it into a fully fledged cravat. I was just going to work with the pattern and present it as many of the people did, as on a hoop.
Yes.
The exhibition. It was really pleasurable. Gosh, it was hard work.
What made it hard work?
Well,
was there a lot of detail in there?
Partly it was that sort of freedom to do what I liked with it. Really.
Yes, which can be quite overwhelming at the start, can't it? When you right, it's up to me now. What shall I do?
Yeah, well, I spent far too long thinking about what stitches I was going to use, what colours I was going to use, and I've worked for a long time on 18th century fashion, and I thought you should just know this. Yeah. But it actually took a surprising amount of time, and then I decided that a lot of the patterns in the magazine were for. I'm sure the magazine intended for them to be made up as tambour patterns. Right. And I did spend a very frustrating week trying to persuade myself that I could do tambour embroidery well. And quickly was disabused of that fact, and decided that just doing chain stitch
might be easy. I've never had a go. I know I've had the discussion with Alison Larkin about tambouring, but I've never had a go at it myself either. And to be quite honest, I always thought it was chain stitch. So I'm thinking, wow, those chain stitches are brilliant. They're all in the same size and everything. Yeah.
When somebody like Alison does it, it's just exquisite to look at.
Lovely, yes.
And we did have some tambour work, including some of Alison's, as part of the StitchOff, which was really wonderful to see. But it was, it was hard. The other thing that was hard I'd forgotten about was that some of the patterns. You've got to remember the magazine was hugely popular, so it was mass produced. It was produced in thousands and thousands of copies every month, which at the time is quite an extraordinary.
It's an extraordinary feat in itself, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes that tells a bit in its what we would now call production values, and it's so some of the patterns in particular are some are a little skew-if, shall we say.
Yeah. But they were hand-drawn, weren't they? So there aren't going to be anything else. In fact, that was another thing I'd thought about, to go off down that rabbit hole, of how actually the patterns were put on paper. There's been some kind of engraving or, that process must have been a nightmare.
Yeah, there were the pattern drawers. Pattern drawing was, a very skilled trade at the time. And until really the magazine started, like the Ladies Magazine, which is one of the first to produce these on a really mass scale in Britain. But before the magazine started to do that, really, the patterns really are in the province of these pattern drawers who distribute their patterns through, lace makers shops and linen drapers shops and haberdashers and things. And and then the magazine comes along, and we don't exactly know. We can't quite work out. I've been trying to work this out recently, and it's very hard to tell who they were getting to do this work for them. I don't think the publisher of the magazine was printing them. I think somebody else was printing them, and they were sort of buying them in and binding them, stitching them.
Right, yes.
But you can, as I say, you can sort of the fact that they're mass produced, you can sort of see sometimes they get much more professional and standardized as they as they go on. But I mean, some of them are pretty wonky, and the cravat that I was working on was not at all symmetrical. So I was sort of having to work with the pattern while also correcting the pattern, which of course is what the women at the time were doing.
Exactly, yes. And the thing, it always comes back to me as well when we're talking about work that people did, years and years and years ago, is these days, my eyesight's not that, I'm terribly short-sighted anyway, but now because my reading vision's going as well, so I'm peering and poking away, and I've got this fantastic LED light now, which I portable, rechargeable. It's brilliant. I plonk that down and I can see what I'm doing. It's lovely. Oh dear, 200 years ago we were messing about with candlelight, weren't we, and sitting by the window and things. It's like we have all the tools, and yet they managed to produce such fantastic work despite all of that hard work. So hats off to them, I always think. It must
have been so hard on the eyes, not least because, as far as I can see from most of the sort of written accounts there are of doing needlework at this time, often, certainly say something like in the Jane Austen household, for instance, often the needlework that was done in the morning was sort of what they used to call plain work. So it'd be things like making caps or gifts for the poor, or shirts, that kind of stuff. Whereas, decorative embroidery was often done in the evenings when you've got those candles burning. So I mean, they must have had much better eyesight than I do as well.
I think we spend too much time staring at computer screens. That was 30 years of it. That's maybe why I can't see the embroidery anymore. Oh dear. Right, well, that's lovely that you actually managed to take part, and that experience added into your research in terms of realising that they were a bit wonky and all the rest of it, and the kind of challenge and delight of choosing the stitches and the fabric and the threads, etc. Put that creativity back into it.
Absolutely.
Now, here's a question, and it's one for me, and I'm sure everybody else is interested as well, because, as I say, I didn't quite get round to doing anything when this was on the go. So has the StitchOff project finished now, or can people like me and anybody interested still kind of have a go?
Absolutely. We still really want people to get involved, if for as long as people want to be involved. The patterns are there. They're on a website that you can download them from. If you just put Ladies Magazine and patterns into a search engine, they'll pop up.
Right.
And at the moment, we've got people working on things, and again, sharing images occasionally on social media, or occasionally emailing me about them. There's been a bit of a renewed interest in them recently, partly because as part of the project, we also ran last year a couple of historic needlework workshops at Chawton House Library, where the exhibition was, and they proved so popular that the person who ran them, Charlotte Bailey, who's a wonderful RSN trained embroiderer, has run some additional workshops late last year and also this year again, and that's brought a whole bunch of new people involved in the StitchOff who in the workshops were just working on one little motif on a handkerchief, but is now sort of thinking bigger and thinking maybe they could tackle something a bit more ambitious. So yes, absolutely, we really do want people to get involved if they'd like to, and to share their work in progress.
Right, well, that's absolutely brilliant news, so I'm pleased about that. That's got me thinking, oh right, yes, what other projects am I doing this year?
Good.
Right, so we usually finish with our guest kind of sharing new projects and future plans and work that's might be of interest. So in your realm, as it were, is there anything similar that you could share with us? Anything that's relevant, that's still ongoing, that we might be interested in looking out for?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things really. I mean, one is, we've just said, is that the StitchOff continues, and we hope people will get involved with it, and that would be wonderful. The other thing is that I have some very tentative plans to publish some of the patterns and maybe some of the others that I found in some library collections in a book format. So that's still at very early stages, but I'm really hoping we can get that off the ground.
Oh, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it?
I'm working with Alison Larkin actually on that at the moment, because what I lack in the historic embroidery expertise in the practical sense, she has in abundance. So we're hoping that together we can come up with something that would be really interesting to people. So that's certainly something that I'm very excited in. But yes, I mean, my bigger project is just to, I have this fantasy of getting as many of those 650 patterns as I can. So I'm on the trail, I'm hunting them down, and when I find them, I'll be telling people about them.
Right, that's absolutely brilliant, and I can totally understand that, because as a bit of an aside, my boyfriend is an avid collector of the Model Engineer magazine. Now, it didn't start in 1770, but his aim is to have a copy of every one. This thing's been going for well over 100 years as well. So the 1800s, it was first started being published. So model engineering is building scale models of steam locomotives, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So he's an avid collector of these, and he gets well excited when some old ones kind of pop up on eBay and things. He has an ongoing alert. Oh, look, there's some more. Oh, brilliant. He's got a whole wall of these now, not a heap, it's a wall of magazines. So
I totally understand that. Yes. Totally
so it just made me laugh when I said, there's somebody else who loves collecting old magazines as well.
Absolutely.
Oh dear. Right, well, it'd be really lovely to find out what's happening with the book. That would be absolutely fantastic. And I think other than that, Jenny, you've mentioned about different ways in which people can keep abreast of what's going on. So this is still an ongoing project, which is wonderful. So kind of to sum up, you have the your blog, the Ladies Magazine Project, and you've got YouTube videos and social media. So do you have like Facebook and Twitter? What would those be?
Facebook and Twitter. I have a Pinterest page too, but that's very much in its early stages.
Yeah.
Although it does have quite a few pictures from the StitchOff on there. But yes, our main channels really are a Facebook page. If you just put Ladies Magazine, it's very important the ladies with the apostrophe S rather than Lady Magazine, which will take you to the modern day publication.
The modern thing. So it's Ladies LADY apostrophe S magazine.
That's correct. If you just put that into Facebook, it'll come up with the page. And similarly on Twitter, it's a slightly different handle. It's at Ladies Mag Project.
At Ladies Mag Project. Right. Well, I'll go and do that Googling and put those links in for everybody, so it's nice and easy to do.
Thank you.
And the thing that's just popped back in my mind as a final kind of comment in all of this was when you were describing the sociability of ladies in that period sitting around with their needlework, chatting and enjoying the creativity and the sociability of it all. That basically exactly describes what goes on now. I'm a member of the Embroiderers Guild, which is where I know Alison from. We're in the same branch at the Hull and East Riding branch. We're a small group, but that's exactly why we are in the Embroiderers Guild, for that same reason. It's the sociability, chatting, doing, getting on, bringing projects in, look what I'm doing, oh, you're doing that, learning off each other, sharing, and just having other people to share your particular hobby and passion is just wonderful. And it still goes on. So although there's all these other demands on our time these days, it's still something that people, me and my group of cronies and friends and hundreds and thousands of other people across the world just absolutely love to do. So
Absolutely.
Your description was a fantastic description of something that's still relevant today. So thank you very much for that. I think that's about it for now, Jenny. Is there anything else that I've forgotten, or anything else that you would like to kind of highlight that I've kind of whizzed past or missed or anything?
I don't think so.
Brilliant. Right. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. It's been an absolute pleasure to share your stitchery story with us today. So, who'd have thought somebody, professor of 18th century studies from Kent University, would have kind of got herself into all this embroidery stuff. But, I think it's absolutely wonderful that you've done that. So thank you so much, Jenny, for your time. I'm sure all our listeners will absolutely love to find out more about the project and other people's work. So again, I'll be sharing all of those links on the Stitchery Stories website. And of course, when we launch, which is going to be a couple of weeks now, then I'm sure you'll be sharing like mad as well to spread the word even further. So
absolutely,
that'd be absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, Jenny. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
If you liked this episode and want to hear more, then please join the Stitchery Stories fan club so you can get an email when a new episode is released. It's a quick and easy way of listening and of keeping up with any news and offers from our lovely guests. Please visit stitcherystories.com to join the fan club. Of course, if you have iTunes, then subscribe there to automatically get new episodes, and why not leave us a review and rating whilst you are there. So that is the end of our Stitchery story for today. So keep stitching, keep smiling, and keep creating your very own Stitchery stories.